Hi there once again. This is evangelist and chalk artist David Tardif coming to you again to try and finish up that message I had started the other day about music and dancing and singing. This is going to be part 2. Hopefully we can get through this. Let's just have a word of prayer to get started. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we come before you now in prayer, just asking for your hand upon me. Lord, again, I ask you to help me to put these verses and this study together, Father, in just a way that it would be pleasing to you, and it would help the people that are listening to understand, Lord, that certain music and dancing and singing is wrong and not pleasing to you. And just help me, Father, now. Use me for your honor and glory. I pray in your Son's name, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Amen. Now, the other day I had spoke on this. I'd started it anyway. I didn't get very far because there's just so much. I had spent a lot of time studying this whole thing out with music and dancing and singing. It was quite a lengthy study because the Bible actually does have quite a bit to say about it. And I have limited time. I spend most of my studying time is like at 3 o'clock in the morning before I go to my regular job, because that's the best time for me to do it, when it's quiet and there's no distractions. Nobody's up. Everybody's sleeping, animals are sleeping, and it's just the best time for me to study is in the morning before I go to work. So I do it at like 3 o'clock in the morning, but I have limited time because I have to be to work at a certain time. But anyway, we'll just do a little quick review. We talked about what does dancing symbolize in the Bible, and I touched down on that. It said it is spoken of as symbolic of rejoicing. The Hebrews had their sacred dances expressive of joy and thanksgiving. When the performers, which were usually females, the ancient dance was very different from the common among the Western nations today. But there was dance has been used as a spiritual act for centuries across cultures, including Western African dance traditions and rituals. In these traditions, dance is not just a form of physical movement, but is considered a means of connecting with the divine. But a few Christian groups believe that dancing is either inherently sinful or that certain forms of dancing could lead to sinful thoughts or activities. And I spoke about how it quite often does and can if you mix alcohol and drugs and the wrong kind of music with it. And I talked about conservatives, chiefly the Baptists, conservative Baptists, that in general or during religious services had considered it to be inherently sinful. So they kind of ruled out all dance as being bad. I'd done a little study on drums. Originally I had studied that out in Ezekiel 28 with Satan and music, and Ezekiel 28 where it talks about Satan being created at the very beginning, and he had tabrets. And I had mentioned that that if you study that out, it's tambourine. But also, if you study out tambourine in the Bible, it's quite often referring to a drum. And I believe this is where the conservatives, Baptists, get the idea that anything with drums in it, music that has a drum in it, is wrong. That's why quite often you go to a conservative church and their music service is generally just with an organ or a piano. Occasionally some will play guitars, but not very often, because they're conservative. They don't want to entertain anything along them lines, which is, that's good. That's their choice before God. And I got nothing against being conservative. I consider myself conservative, but sometimes you need to really study things out. Just because there's a drum, like I said, like in a marching band or something, I don't believe one drum is bad. And say classical music, which will have drums, but not a lot. Not like a rock and roll concert where you have all the different drums. I don't believe one singular drum and someone just tapping on it to keep the beat is wrong. It's depending upon the song that they're singing and the tune that's being played. I would consider like Kenny G. There's no singing there, it's just music. Appeals to the soul and the spirit, just like classical music does. It's not appealing to your flesh, it's appealing to your soul and your spirit. But anyway, conservatives, this is, like I said, they wouldn't, no music if it has a drum in it. They also have this other thing, pastors, if you've been married more than once, you can't be a pastor. They like that 1 Timothy 3, it gives the qualifications for being a bishop, a pastor. They always say, well, if you've been married more than once, you can't be a pastor. But if you look at that verse, it also, at the same time, also says if you've never been married, you can't pastor either. Yep, they don't hold to that for some reason. They just like to hold to the part where if you've been married more than once, you can't pastor. And they skip right over the part about if you've never been married, you can't pastor either. And then the whole thing with being divorced. God divorced Israel. God divorced Israel. Why did God divorce Israel? The exact same thing is happening with America today and the church. Yet for some reason, people think God's just going to rapture us out of here and not punish us for turning our backs on him, just like Israel did. You look it up in Jeremiah 3:8, where it talks about God giving Israel a writing of divorcement. You look it up. God divorced Israel. Yet for some reason we, as Christians here in America, don't think God's going to punish us because we're under grace. And we are. We're under grace. Now, remember I talked about in 1 Samuel 16, where King Saul was being plagued by an evil spirit. And music, how it has a therapeutic effect on our soul and our spirit. And David, who was skilled at playing the harp, the Bible tells us, was able to drive out the evil spirits from King Saul by playing the harp, by playing godly music, good music that appealed to the soul and the spirit. The evil spirits don't like that. They don't like that. That's why it's important to be in a church that plays godly music before the service, to drive the evil spirits away. Now, if you go to one of these churches like Hillsong and similar churches like that don't play godly music, doesn't have that tune that speaks to the soul and the spirit, it doesn't drive out the evil spirits. It kind of invites them in. Rock and roll music, country music, anything that appeals to the flesh, draws the evil spirits in. doesn't chase them off, it draws them in. Then on top of that, if you add a compromising version of the Bible on top of that, say an NIV or something, you've already drawn the evil spirits in with the rock music. And now you're not preaching out of the pure word of God. The NIV removes the blood and all kinds of stuff. Evil spirits don't get driven away. Now, the other day, I listened to a Christian radio station for 45 minutes. And if I didn't pay attention to the words, you would have thought it was just a regular radio station. It was worldly music. I used to listen to BBN, which is the Bible Broadcasting Network, but now I don't. They changed the music and the versions that the preachers use. At one time, there was good, godly music on there. Then all of a sudden, I noticed a change. They were playing some modern music, modern Christian music, with a different beat. Wasn't speaking to my heart and my soul anymore. Started appealing to my flesh. And then I started hearing some preachers on there, preaching out of different versions of the Bible. They used to just use the King James. Then they started getting preachers on there using any old version. So I stopped listening to it. I started downloading choir music from churches I trust. But let's get back to it. Remember, I had talked about, because we were talking about singing and the drum and stuff. Remember in Exodus 15 was the story of Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Aaron, how she took a drum, and all the other women that were with her took drums. And they followed each other, and they were dancing, and they were singing. They would sing to God, "What a victory. What a victory." And God was pleased with it. So, see, they were singing, they were dancing, and they were playing drums, and it was still pleasing to God. But the conservatives, for some reason, they just don't want to, I understand why they do it, but you can't just rule out all music because you hear a drum in it. And singing, I mean, remember I talked about songs in the Bible, that there were 17 different times where people in the Bible were singing to God, and God was pleased with it. And none of the songs were anything like we hear today with everything. I mean, they sing about drinking and smoking and fornicating and speeding and getting drunk and leaving your wife for another woman, and it just goes on and on and on. But none of the songs in the Bible had anything to do with that. They were songs to God, praising God for helping them through a hard time or giving them victory, which is what our Christian song should be about still. But Hillsong and others have changed it to about how supposedly we love God. We don't love God like we should. If Christians love God the way that we should, this world wouldn't be in the mess that it's in. And I remember I talked about some of the songs that came out in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was so bad. Remember Ian Duran, he had that song, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll is all my brain and body needs. That's the stuff, you can't tell me that ain't from the devil. And then you had this other group, I can't remember if I even mentioned these guys the other day, but David Peel and the Revolutionaries. They weren't a big popular band, but they had songs like Smoke Pot, Everybody Smoke Pot. Drugs. Encouraging teenagers to do drugs. Just like the other one with Ian Duran, Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. I'm surprised he didn't have alcohol in there too. And David Peel had another song there, I Pledge Allegiance to the Bag of Marijuana. Ain't that wonderful? Instead of pledging allegiance to America, I pledge allegiance to the bag of marijuana. So sad, so sad. But remember, these people that grew up in this 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s listening to this crap are the ones in charge now. Not only are they running America, they're pretty much running all the countries of the world. I mean, think about it. All the countries in the world, you follow these people back at the age they are now, and you follow back their ages, and you'll see that they grew up in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So sad. So sad. You know, a third of my riders, I do Uber on the side. I have a regular job and I Uber on the side. A third of my riders go to the pot store. Thanks to liberal Christians allowing that to get voted in instead of voting against it. They voted for it. So now there's a pot store in every corner. Up where I live, you can find, there's like 5 of them marijuana stores in a 1 mile stretch. 5 of them in a 1 mile stretch. And a third of my riders go to these pot stores. You know, if Satan can keep you high, he can keep you out of the race and out of the battle and under subjection and under his subjection. So sad, so sad. But anyway, let's get back to Matthew. Remember the story in Matthew chapter 14 where we have the story of Salome dancing before King Herod. Matthew 14, 1 through 12, we'll read it again. It says, At that time Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him, and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them, and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John the Baptist's head and a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And the disciples came, took up the body, and buried it, and went and told Jesus. You know, we've got young girls doing the exact same thing today on TikTok, Facebook, you name it, flaunting as much of their body as they can for all to see. For all to see. This is a type of dancing that God isn't pleased with, that Salam was doing here. You got Herod and all his buddies sitting around drinking for his birthday party. And here they are, they're a bunch of dirty old men. They want this young girl to come out and dance before them. And she's all for it, too. She's all for it. She didn't care. Offering her, the king, Herod offering her whatever she wanted. Just come out and dance before us while we're all drinking and having a good time so they can fantasize about her. Because he didn't know that she was going to ask for the head of John the Baptist, because he feared John the Baptist. He was a prophet of God. But his wife was mad. He was mad. She didn't like him very much because he preached at him. John the Baptist preached at Herod and Herodias, said it wasn't lawful for him to have her because she used to be married to Herod's brother. And Herod divorced his wife so he could marry Herodias. And John the Baptist called him out on it. John the Baptist called him out on it. But we got young girls doing that today. Young girls doing that today. You go on TikTok and Facebook, and you'll see it. Girls dancing, showing off their bodies, half naked. Thinking it's funny, thinking it's cool. You got moms entering their daughters in the beauty pageants and the like. Shame on you, ladies, shame on you. There's sex offenders, child molesters, pedophiles, watching this stuff, and you're feeding it to them, letting your daughter prance around in front of them. Even down where I work, my regular day job, there's pedophiles. We got everything down there. Pedophiles, child molesters. We got rapists, murderers. We got this one guy's been, the police have come down and picked him up several times just for child pornography. Yet we got grown women entering their daughters in these beauty pageants and things like that, where they get up on stage half naked. You know, there's people out there watching that stuff that shouldn't be watching that stuff. You're just encouraging it, feeding it to them, feeding it to them. Porn is a visual adultery that leads to actual adultery, followed by divorce. We need to run to Jesus, not to porn. You know, I'm not just supposed to tell you what the Bible says and teaches. What you do with it is between you and God. You can keep listening to your rock and roll. You can keep dancing to the devil's music. And you can keep running around half naked. That's between you and God. But you've been warned. God's not pleased with it. God's not pleased with it. see. First Peter 3, verses 3 and 4 talks about not letting your adorning be external. The braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry or the clothing you wear, but let your adoring be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. Prophets have always counseled us to dress modestly. This counsel is found on the truth that the human body is God's sacred creation. Respect your body as a gift from God. Through your dress and appearance, you can show the Lord that you know how precious your body is. Now, there's a difference between dressing modestly because you're ashamed of your body and dressing modestly because you're saving your body for the eyes of your future husband only. By tradition, Salome, which is this young girl now, I studied it out. The Bible doesn't actually tell us that her name was Salome, but if you study it out, there's her name is given by a man named Josephus, historian, who lived around 100 AD, which is, pretty close to the time of Christ, maybe 60, 70 years later. And chances are he could have actually been alive as when Jesus was walking the earth, and he actually could have been alive when this thing happened with Salome. But anyway, he gives us her name. It says, by tradition, Salome was Herodias' daughter, who danced for Herod. Herod was so entranced that he promised her anything she wished, even half the kingdom. At the end of her life, Salome was married a third time to a certain Alexis, friend of Herod's. See, one of those drunken buddies ended up marrying this girl. She was only 12 when she danced before him. And obviously, he must have been a full-grown man. He was a friend of the king, friend of Herod. After her failure to nominate Herod heir to her brother, she remained in Rome with her daughter and granddaughters, where she died. It is not until the lengthy and sumptuous description of Salome's dance that the daughter of Herodias exercises her powerful ability to She seduced Herod to obtain what her mother most desired, the head of the sacred prophet. While the historical Salome did not, in fact, marry her father, Herod, her two marriages do certainly carry forth the incestuous tradition associated with the house of Herod. There was a lot of incest going on there. A lot of incest. The moral of Salome's story, as the reputation of John the Baptist grew in the centuries after the death of Christ, so did the myth of Salome's evil. The story was used to illustrate the need to resist sexual temptations and the potential spiritual risks in the diversion of dancing. She danced before them, literally, in the midst of them as they reclined on their couches, indolently gazing at her while she danced. While she danced. Well, and like I said, women are still doing that today. Still doing that today. following Psalms, dressing provocatively, dancing in front of people all drunk. That's why I said I got nothing against a man and a wife dancing at home. It's when you go out to the bar or the nightclub and you're parading your wife in front of other men while she's dressed provocatively and everybody's drinking. Causes men to sin, commit adultery in their heart with your wife. A while back we went down to the Grand Canyon, and after that, because we stopped in, we checked out Fremont Street in Las Vegas. And they pretty much, there's salams all over the place there. I'm just going to call them salams. There was this lady bartender there on Fremont Street serving alcohol in a bikini. And she was a pretty lady, too. So she's serving alcohol to men so they can get drunk and fantasize about her. Increases her tips. She's doing it for money. Doing it for money. Showing off her body for money. She was contributing to the delinquency of an adult. Remember I said earlier, porn is visual adultery that leads to actual adultery? There she is, in a bikini, leaving not much for the imagination, serving alcohol to men so they get drunk and fantasize about her. And then you have the same thing going on with regular waitresses, like waitresses at Hooters, dressing provocatively so men will get drunk, give them bigger tips, not caring that they're thinking about them in an appropriate way. Because a lot of the men that go to these places are married. They don't need to be seeing another woman running around in a bikini. That's why it's not good to go to the beach. It's not good to go to the beach where there's a lot of people. Now, I got nothing against the family swimming in their pool in the backyard, or going to a lake to go swimming, or even going to a secluded beach when it's just family. But when you go to a beach and there's hundreds and thousands of people there, and you've got 300 women running around in bikinis, it's going to be hard for a man to keep pure thoughts. Another thing there, I didn't notice, my wife was telling me, but in Las Vegas, they give you free drinks. So you'll keep gambling, and so that you'll keep flirting with the waitress who is dressed provocatively. You're going to keep wanting. They get you drunk, they get you gambling, and then they get you flirting with that cute waitress. And you'll keep calling that same waitress back so you can get more drinks. That's what they want. They're not stupid. Now, I talked earlier about dressing modestly, the way women used to dress. If you remember, like, say, Little House on the Prairie. Do you remember that? The only thing you could really see was her head sticking out. They'd have a nice blouse on, but it wouldn't be tight. And they'd have a dress on that could went down to their ankles. And slowly over the years, we've raised that up higher and higher and higher. We've raised it up. It's not down to the ankle anymore. Went from the ankle to halfway up to the knee, then all the way up to the knee, and now just below the crotch. So that when the woman sits down, you can see her underwear. Such a shame. Such a shame. And then some women say, well, I cover up. You know, just because you got stretchy pants on doesn't mean you're dressing modestly. You might be covered up, but if your clothes are skin tight, you're not dressing modestly. You're not dressing modestly. You're not leaving much for the man's imagination. Okay? You're not leaving much for the man's imagination. Now, where am I? I missed my spot somewhere. But we'll go the story of Esther. Oh, 17, here we are. Why did Herod marry his brother's wife? On a visit to Rome, he stayed with his half-brother, Herod II, and there fell in love with his wife, Herodias, granddaughter of Herod the Great. And the two agreed to marry after Herod had divorced his wife. After he agreed to divorce his wife. And then we'll go, and then in Esther chapter 1, like I said, I'm running out of time. We're going to even have time to read that. But we have a similar story here. In the first story, in Matthew 14, we have Salome, a 12-year-old girl, who let it all out in front of a bunch of drunken men, just so she could get what she wanted and what her mother wanted. And then here, in Esther chapter 1, like I said, we don't have time to go there, but you read the story sometime about Queen Vashti, who does just the opposite. Just the opposite of what the king wanted her to do back then. The king wanted, because you have to study out, doesn't just tell us that, but the king, again, celebrating with all his drunken buddies, wanted the queen to come out and dance before them. Wanted the queen to come out and dance before them, wearing only her crown. And she was a very beautiful woman. The Bible tells us that she was very beautiful. But she refused. She wasn't going to come out naked. Because if you study it out, you read Josephus and his commentaries on that stuff, that the king actually wanted Vashti, the queen, to come out naked with just her crown on, and dance around in front of him and all his drunken buddies. Now here's the queen. She already had half of everything. And she refused. She refused. Modesty is a God-given principle that can help us learn to use our bodies appropriately here in morality. The definition of modesty in True to the Faith is an attitude of humility and decency in dress, grooming, language, and behavior. Modesty is not vain or boastful. Tradition that she was ordered to appear naked, wearing only her crown, and once she made up her mind, she was ready to deal with the consequences. She teaches us about the role of integrity and courage. Integrity takes courage. And though she made the king furious, and her refusal did cost her the position as queen, Vashti stood by her convictions and left us an example of feminine modesty, strength to stand of herself in extreme situation. The most valuable lesson we learned from Vashti's story is that God is never absent. He works through every situation we encounter. The queen may have never considered God at all, but he used her as a valuable instrument and powerfully displayed his providence and sovereignty. Now here's an illustration of modesty. Young ladies, this is for you. A woman arrived in a store wearing clothes that showed her body all too well. The shop owner, being a wise older man, took a good look at her, asked her to sit down, looked straight into her eyes, and said something she would never forget for the rest of her life. Young lady, everything that God has made valuable in this world is covered up and hard to see or find. For example, he said, where can you find diamonds? In the ground, covered and protected. Where are the pearls? Deep in the ocean, covered and protected in a beautiful shell. Where can you find gold? Underground, covered and protected with layers of rock. And to get there, you have to work very, very hard and dig deep. He looked at her again and said, your body is sacred and unique to God. You are far more precious than gold, diamonds, and pearls. Therefore, you must be covered too. He then added, if you keep your precious minerals like gold, diamonds, and pearls deeply covered, a reputable mining organization with the necessary machines will work for years to mine those precious goods. First, they will contact your government. Illustration of family. Second, sign professional contracts. Marriage contract. Third, they will professionally extract those goods and tenderly refine those precious goods. Marital life. But if you let your minerals find themselves to the top of the earth's surface, exposed to everyone, you will always attract many illegal miners to come, exploit illegally, and freely take those riches, and leave you without the precious goods God gave you. Women are valuable. Remember, class is more desirable than trash. And that little illustration is by author Diane Walls. There's a huge difference between lust and love. Lust is physical. Love is emotional. Lust is to take. Love is to gift. Lust is of the eyes. Love is of the heart. Satisfaction is what matters in lust. Sacrifice is what matters in love. Lust is for the body. Love is for the soul. Lust thinks about I. Love remembers we. Lust dies. Love grows. Lust fades. Love lasts. Lust is not love. Don't desire.